Hi, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the first installment of the Retain and Expand Your Customers webinar series. My name is Mira. I'm the marketing lead here at ValueWise, and we're super excited to have you here today to share 5 ways a customer advisory board will increase retention for your organization. We're going to jump right in, so let's introduce our speakers today. ValueWise CEO Ross Fulton is joined by our special guest, Betsy Westhafer, who is the CEO and founder of the Congruity Group. During this webinar today, Ross and Betsy will be answering questions. So please, if you have any questions during the duration of this webinar, put them in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. Ross, I'll hand it over to you to get us started.
Thanks, Mira. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for all joining us. Really a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you today. And as Mira mentioned, I'm the founder and CEO of ValueWise, and I'll get shot if I don't do a quick company overview, which I'll take 10 seconds to do. So we at ValueWise, we work with B2B software companies, and we help them retain and expand their customers plus their revenue, and we help them do that at scale. We have worked with a lot of B2B software companies across the growth spectrum, but really have a sweet spot with companies who are either migrating towards or already are at that enterprise status. And we're a team of customer success leaders and professionals who have both expertise in the strategy of customer success and the operations of customer success. So today we're really going to sort of talk about kind of how can our customers help us? How do your customers help you? Any customer really worth having today in B2B software, they understand that this is a partnership between you and them as customer and solution provider, and they want to help you in the same way that Tom Cruise here in this movie whose name I can't remember, as wanted to help Cuba Gooding Jr. And so this help me help you mindset is really something that we see as important to enable within the customer base. And a customer advisory board is a very, very powerful platform through which you can really enable your customers to help you help them. When it comes to, okay, well, what could my customers help me with? We at ValueWise, we specialize in really helping our clients increase both the impact, the efficiency, and the scale of their customer success strategy. And with customer advisory boards and customers really helping you help them, we see them really being able to add a lot of value around the impact of customer success strategy. And this slide is really just breaking down what we at ValueWise see with our clients as being the key value drivers and metrics that can be improved in relation to impact of customer success strategy. And in reality, a customer advisory board can provide some very key inputs into all of these value drivers and metrics. But today we're going to be focusing on customer retention, mostly because it always should be a fundamental priority in any of your companies, in any B2B software business, especially in the subscription economy. Certainly today with COVID, with the economic current climate, customer retention arguably should be #1 priority in your companies. So we're very lucky and fortunate to have Betsy with us today to really drill into how specifically a customer advisory board can drive improvement retention. And we're going to drill into sort of 5 elements specifically that go into a well-designed, effective customer retention strategy. There's of course many elements that do go into a customer retention strategy, but we're going to focus on these 5 and really understand with Betsy how a customer advisory board can be leveraged to provide some very critical insights and inputs from customers that help us move towards achieving and operationalizing these 5 elements effectively, and then getting that uptick in retention off the back end. So Betsy, it's a pleasure to have you here with us, and really we appreciate your time and having your expertise with us on the session today.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. I'm so honored to be here. It's been great working with you to put this webinar together, and I'm really excited to dive in.
Absolutely. So why don't we set the scene here? Mike, tell us a bit more about the Congruity Group, and then set the scene around just the fundamentals as to what a customer advisory board is, in case any of the audience aren't too familiar with the concept. And then we'll start drilling into those 5 elements.
Sure, sure. Happy to. Again, my name's Betsy Westhafer. I'm the CEO of the Congruity Group, and our firm helps our clients really do a few high-level things. One, build deep, trusting relationships with their customers, and also gain market insights by leveraging those relationships with their customers. And what we strive to do for all of our clients are really these top high-level things. One, we want 100% retention of those clients who serve on the customer advisory board. The second thing is double-digit account value growth. So, any revenue related activity with those accounts of the board members, we want to see at least double-digit expansion. And then finally, triple-digit return on investment of the customer advisory board. And we have some metrics that we can share around how to measure that ROI. And we help our clients recruit their key customers, and some of the logos you see there are just a few of the relationships that we have with these companies that serve on customer advisory boards or have their own customer advisory boards.
Awesome.
So at a really high level, what a customer advisory board is, it's a strategic initiative. It's not a meeting, it's not an event, it's certainly not a sales event. It's really a strategic initiative led by the executive team. And in a perfect scenario, the CEO is the owner, because then that sends the message to the board members that this is of utmost importance, that these customers are of utmost importance to the CEO. There's nothing else he should be doing right this minute than being engaged with the customers. And we have our meetings off-site so that the executive team can unplug, get away from all the distractions, and really be 100% focused on these conversations with the customers. These customers who are considered to be on the board are the executive leaders of the key clients. So it's really a C-suite to C-suite conversation happening where we discuss, things that matter to the C-suite. So strategic type topics, which we'll get into in the next slide. So it's an opportunity to really build those executive relationships and validate strategies. So instead of building things in a silo, throwing them out to the market and seeing what sticks, you're really having a chance to vet those strategies with the decision makers of your key clients. And in the process of doing that, you're also getting the market insights that you need to do that. So generally speaking, we meet face-to-face 2 to 3 times a year, depending on the preference of the client, but we have calls in between. So we keep that conversation going. We keep the momentum, the traction. We update the clients on what's been happening since the last meeting. And we do this again off-site. And we really highly recommend that it is a 2-to-1 ratio where the host company has one person for every 2 clients, because what we want them to see is that it's not about the host company, it's really about them. So we really try to manage that ratio. And then we coach our executive team leaders that they're really there to listen 80% of the time and talk 20% of the time. And that 20% when they're talking is really asking probing questions and clarifying their answers and really diving deep into to what's being said. So if you think about it, these board members then become an extension of the executive team. So these are advisors, these are conversations that are held under an NDA. There's a lot of vulnerability there. So it's really an extension of the executive team. And in the CAB, there are a lot of topics that cover every aspect of the business. And what we normally do is take 2 or 3 of these topics. So you can see the list there. It could be the technology, could be the competitive landscape, it could be business models, what drives the customers. We usually take 2 or 3 of these and go real deep over the course of a day and a half or 2 days. So instead of just lightly touching on multiple topics, we'll go deep into 2 or 3 topics each meeting. And then the next meeting, pick a couple of different ones and maybe build on a previous one. So as you can see, a CAB covers every aspect of the business.
Perfect. That's a great overview, Betsy. And yeah, I think this list of topics really give a good representation of the breadth and depth that you can go with a customer advisory board. It isn't simply a how are you doing check-in, but it's very, very strategic in my mind.
Exactly.
So we're going to do a quick poll question for everyone here on the webinar, just to sort of see and make sure we're speaking at the right level for everyone here in terms of what is a customer advisory board and how to apply it to this goal of driving customer retention. So we've got a question here around what the your experience is with a CAB. 4 options. So you should have a panel that's popped up and you can respond, and we'll keep that open for a few more seconds. Betsy, just while we wait for and give people a chance to respond, what's your general sort of sense across, let's say, the B2B technology industry around customer advisory boards and companies' experience with them? Do a lot of companies have a customer advisory board today, or do most not have one? Are most moving towards having one? What's your perception?
Yeah, actually, I found a quote not too long ago that there was a survey done, and there are not a lot of companies doing customer advisory boards, which is surprising to me in a way and not in a way. But they said that of those Fortune 500 companies that they polled, that of those that said they do have a customer advisory board, 90+% said they were valuable to extremely valuable. And they also noted in this survey that it is a competitive advantage just having one. And we'll go into that a little bit more about the value add to the customers of being on a customer advisory board. But I do think that, and this is my aspiration, I guess, I want to see every company doing them, especially now with what we're dealing with, because everything has changed for everybody's customers. So now's a perfect time to really engage the customers and see what life looks like for them, post-COVID.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm not sure if everyone here can see the results on my screen, but I can see them, and so I'll read them out. Looks like we have 67%, which is amazing percentage, which is great to hear, of everyone on the webinar today is running their own customer advisory board. So that's outstanding. So it really allows us to get into some good detail today. And 17% in the process of establishing one, another 17% just learning about customer advisory boards, and no one today has a professionally managed customer advisory board, which I'm sure you're happy to hear, Betsy. But certainly speaks to, I think, again, where the professionalism and the maturity around customer advisory boards can be evolved. So we'll move on and get into back to these 5 elements. And as I said, we're going to take the next sort of 30 minutes or so, and then we'll have Q&A at the end. But please feel free to type any questions you have as we work through this into the Q&A panel, the chat panel, and we'll pick those up. But we're going to walk through, for each one by one. But I lie when I say one by one in terms of these first 2. We're going to look at these first 2 elements together because they really go hand in hand. There isn't arguably a point in defining outcomes that are going to create recurring value for your customers that you can prescribe to them if you don't then have processes, playbooks, a plan on how to scalably deliver those outcomes. So we're going to look at those 2 together. And these 2 really speak to what we at ValueWise think of as first principles of customer retention. And so principle number 1 ultimately being we need to recognize that retention is driven through effective adoption within our customer base, adoption of our solutions by our customers. Recognize that adoption is not simply customers clicking away in your solution, but actually using the solution in a way that computes to them moving towards and achieving that recurring measurable value through their usage of the product, and defining adoption that way and understanding that it's that we need to achieve that version of adoption to then enable us to move towards scalable customer retention. To achieve that type of adoption, we see 2 key elements, which is really what we're looking at here in this first section. One is being able to define, well, what does value look like for my customers that they can achieve through the usage of our product. It needs to be recurring value. It needs to be measurable value. It needs to be value that can be achieved through the usage of your product, and not just a sort of high level go-to-market strategy value proposition, but tangible outcomes that you can directly link to behavior and activities in relation to the adoption of your solutions and services. And once we have those outcomes defined, we call those value-based outcomes in ValueWise. We then want to build out those plans, those playbooks, those processes. Success plans is becoming a very prevalent term for that concept, i.e. the blueprint that really says to both our internal customer-facing teams, our CS organizations, as well as importantly, it says to the customer, here's what has to happen to get you to this level of adoption that enables you then to achieve each of these outcomes. And again, have these plans being prescribed. So these two very fundamental elements around outcome definition and then defining these success plans, to us, it's the real core science that goes into any customer journey map and are critical to your customer retention strategy. So Betsy, in terms of how a customer advisory board kind of looks at that outcome definition piece, what's your perspective there?
Yeah, so there are a few things to think about there. If you're thinking about these executives talking to executives, these two companies coming together and talking about their businesses, then you get a glimpse into what their high-level objectives are. So then you can connect the dots from the software to the outcomes from using the software to how that then helps your clients reach those business objectives. So in the CAB, you're able to have the conversations to get to the core of what their high level objectives are. And we're very upfront. We ask them very directly, you know, what are your high level objectives? And again, they're willing to share because these are all confidential conversations. One thing I'd like to mention is when we're doing the recruiting, we don't have competitors in the room. So it's an opportunity for everybody to really openly share. So we can get these insights about what their high level objectives are and make sure that we are then delivering the consistent and measurable value to them. And that ensures alignment. And again, to what's going on right now, whenever there's a market shift and you have access to all of these decision makers and how they're shifting their businesses based on what's happening in the market, then you can assure that you continue to be in line with the outcomes that have been defined or redefined.
It makes total sense. And I think the connecting the dots piece is, to me, a key takeaway here, in that the executive persona that should be attending these customer advisory boards, they can speak holistically across the for the organization around here are the outcomes, here are the goals that we're shooting for. And that as for the attendees on this webinar is key input to take and then map to connect back to the equivalent inputs that you're getting from maybe your individual contributors, your sponsors, your power users, your key influencers in that same customer, who have also given their perspective around, hey, here are the key goals, here are the key outcomes we're shooting for. You've had those conversations pre-sale, you've had those conversations during onboarding, those conversations should constantly happen. But quite often, certainly organizations we work with at ValueWise, they struggle getting that audience with the real top of the organization and the opportunity to spend the time with them to have this type of conversation. So we can do that through a customer advisory board and map that to the other inputs we're getting from other key stakeholders in the account. Then we get a very comprehensive kind of tapestry built around this outcome set of definitions that then can help drive the definition of our prescriptive outcomes as a software vendor that we're going to take out to our entire customer base.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sorry. I was just going to add, there are two ways to gather this customer insight. So as you said, at the user level, and that information gets filtered up, you know, throughout the organization. A CAB gets the high level strategic information and filters it down. So it's a perfect way to make sure that all of the bases are covered from this bottom up approach and a top down approach.
Yeah, and I think there's an extremely high dose of reality in this perspective we get from a CAB. We can go read the 10Ks for customers who are public companies, or we can look at their website, we can look at their sales decks, their mission statements, and say, oh, well, therefore their goals are X, Y, and Z. In reality, what is actually keeping that CEO, that COO up at night could be quite distinctly different, and again evolves over time as global macro events are happening. So I think there is a key distinction here.
It's funny you say that, Ross. There was a CAB meeting I had where they were talking a lot about feature function, and you know there had been some coaching to keep it high level, but every now and then the conversation can go down in the weeds, and it's our job to make sure that doesn't happen. But this one gentleman on the board made the comment. He said, you know what, I don't care about that. Here's what I want to know. How am I going to sleep at night? How am I going to spend the weekends with my family? and how am I going to keep my job? And that came directly from a CIO of a massive organization. And so that's what you can get to is, okay, what is it that this guy or girl really needs to know, and what's bothering them? What is the typical what keeps you up at night question? And so it's really good to hear that, not just being vulnerable as a host company, kind of opening up your business to your customers, but vice versa, where they start opening up and letting you see inside what's going on with them.
Mm-hmm. And so that helps us, sort of brings us to the delivery of these outcomes. And I think there's how our customers want to realize these outcomes, how they want to adopt the product. And then there's, again, how they can in reality achieve these outcomes and adopt the product, taking into account kind of political culture, various other aspects of their current state, and then the delta between that current state and their desired state that relates to these outcomes being achieved. How do you see, Betsy, a CAB kind of help filling those gaps?
Yeah, so again, because this is at a strategic level, you really get a high level view of every aspect of the business, just company wide, what are all their strategic objectives. So that gives the host company the ability to say, okay, here's where we need to direct our development efforts, because this is what matters throughout their organization. And when you're having these conversations, you by default, because of the nature of the conversations, you get to see how they envision their future. And when you can have those conversations and see where they're heading, it gives you, as the host company, the opportunity to get out in front of them and be there when they get there. And think of the competitive advantage that is when you're getting these insights directly from your customers. And then when you do that, adoption naturally follows, right? Because they've had the chance to tell you, and you're aligning with their strategic objectives. So then adoption is, it's what they want to do, not what they feel compelled to do.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think it's there's a lot of noise out there right now in the B2B software market, some of which ValueWise is certainly creating around the prescriptive outcome approach to sales as well as customer success. It has to be combined with the prescriptive approach as it relates to how those outcomes are going to be delivered. And typically we're seeing that to be a secondary consideration, maybe even a reactive consideration by a lot of software companies out there, which just causes certainly some short-term pain, and can cause some serious long-term issues if those questions aren't answered. But again, I think the CAB really provides an ongoing perspective on how adoption can be effectively delivered within these stakeholders who should be representing the ideal customer profiles that each of the webinar attendees companies have. And just as you say, giving that particular company an advantage compared to their competitors around driving adoption.
I think you really hit on it when you said, being more proactive than reactive. And that, you think about the benefits of that, it's too numerous to list on the advantages of having the ability to be more proactive.
Yeah. And it's as if we scripted this, which we didn't, but that's a perfect segue onto our third element, which is predictive churn risk indicators. And so certainly our view at ValueWise is very much that we must be proactive, Betsy, as you describe, across all elements or all phases of the customer journey and all the key milestones around that. And to be proactive, especially around events that we're not necessarily planning to have, but that just inevitably happen, like churn risk, we need to be able to be predictive to be proactive, or to be as effectively proactive as we can. And so the ability to predict, hey, we're seeing some bubbling up of some leading indicators that point to a churn risk type that we've already identified as a potential scenario in our customer base. Hopefully we've built the triage plans for those risk scenarios, but we can then proactively trigger those triage plans because we're able to predict what these churn risk indicators are. We think it's a very necessary component of any customer retention strategy. No company wants to think about there being churn risk prevalent within their customer base, but it is a reality. We can't avoid it. We shouldn't ignore it, and we should plan for it. So identifying and defining what these churn risk indicators are, i.e. what would be the factors that could cause these first two elements not happening, that could cause these outcomes not being realized, or could cause the plans to achieve those outcomes, the adoption plans, the success plans not being followed, not being successfully completed. What could cause those scenarios? That's what we think about in terms of predictive churn risk indicators. And again, we're going to do another quick poll question here just to see everyone on this webinar how you approach this concept of churn risk indicators and the predictive nature of them, because I think it's certainly something we see being talked about in every organization, but there is a pretty broad spectrum of maturity around approaching this subject, some of which is rooted in the science of we don't know what questions to ask about data to identify and monitor these indicators, versus some organizations know exactly what questions they want to ask. They just can't operationally ask the questions because they don't have the data, the systems and so on set up to enable the asking of the questions and then the action to be taken off the back of the answers to those questions when they get it. So that's what we're asking for here. We'll give that to maybe Mira a couple more seconds, and then we'll take a look at the results here. So 75% have churn risk indicators, but are not sure of their accuracy, and pretty simple split. The other 25% say, yeah, we have these indicators and they're accurate, which is fantastic. And I think the accuracy piece is really the root here, Betsy, in terms of the relationship between a customer advisory board and the ability to develop these indicators, because it really is about to drive accuracy, we need to know what questions to ask of our engagement data, our telemetry data, our customer data foundation, to then be able to monitor these indicators. And I think a customer advisory board provides, again, the perfect platform to help inform what are those questions we should be asking about data, what are the scenarios we should be looking for, and then allow us to take action around mitigating those risks. But would love to kind of get your perspective on that.
Yeah, exactly, Ross. And it really goes back again to the trusting relationships, because when you build these relationships and you have that two-way communication going, that's going to enable you to hear things earlier and have the opportunity to mitigate those things before they turn into gargantuan problems or worst case scenario churn. So the relationship building that happens in the CAB meetings is a big piece of it. Because of that, the customers then become invested in your success. They feel a part of your team. They feel like they can say things to you openly and honestly, and that you'll embrace their feedback. And they want to see you succeed. Plus, it's important to them that you do succeed. You're part of their success as well. So you create this valuable interdependence upon one another. And when that happens, then they will come to you. So you don't have to constantly be trying to dig and get this information. You will have the opportunity to hear directly from them because they don't want it to go south either. So again, it's that two-way communication in the relationships, and then that way everybody achieves their success metrics. And when you have that win-win situation going on with a customer, then it's so hard to leave. You make it harder and harder for a client to leave because you have that interdependence and that trust and that communication.
Yep. No, makes total sense. So we then move into element number 4 around increasing customer advocacy, which I had it earlier on in the session as a distinct category of value driver and metric that we can use to measure the impact of our customer success strategies. But we've got it here as an element also within the customer retention strategy, because there's obviously a clear link between customer advocacy and retention. I don't think it's a solid line, and that it's a guaranteed formula that if we have great advocacy represented through maybe NPS, et cetera, that we're guaranteed to retain that customer. It's not quite as simple as that, unfortunately, but there's a very strong relationship there. And so again, Betsy, I think a customer advisory board really, as you were just alluding to, helps, I think, in 2 ways: increase clearly advocacy within the accounts that are forming your customer advisory board, but also giving very key inputs as it relates to how do I take what's working here with these accounts on my advisory board and scale it out to the rest of my accounts. Would love to get your perspective on that side of the equation.
Yeah, there's kind of two parts to this. I'm often asked, why would high-level executives take a day and a half, 2 days out of their busy schedule to go help a vendor with their business? And by the way, these board members don't get paid to be on the board. They get their expenses covered, but they don't get paid. And the reason for that is we don't want any kind of monetary relationship, because we don't want them to feel like, oh, I don't want to say that because I'll get kicked off the board and lose however much money. So I get asked a lot, why would they do that? You know, that's expensive time, right? To get on a plane and fly across the country to be on this advisory board. So the key to that is building a customer advisory board that really provides additional value. And so some of the things that are meaningful to the board members are that they can share best practices with their peers. Like, all of these board members around the table have this common experience of having this provider with their software. So they can network with one another, they can share best practices, they can provide thought leadership. A lot of times people like to do that. They like to give their opinions on things to their peers, and it matters. They also can influence a key supplier. That's important. If you think, okay, I really need this supplier to do XYZ for our success, you have the opportunity and the direct access to the C-suite to be able to provide that influence. And another thing, it's an exclusive opportunity. Our boards usually have anywhere from 10 to 12 people on them, so not everybody gets invited to be part of that. And so it is an honor to be part of the board, so that's valuable to them. And when you provide all of this additional value to your board members, it creates, again, that barrier to the competition. So when you're providing all this value beyond the software itself, then they want to reciprocate. It's just human nature. They want to reciprocate. So again, they're invested in your success and willing to go above and beyond. So what we do in the CAB, at the end of the meeting, we send out our client, the host company, out to the lobby of the hotel, of the boardroom. And then we sit down with the board members outside of earshot of the members, and we ask them a bunch of additional questions that maybe just needed to be wrapped up, or maybe somebody said, hey, I just thought of something that I didn't have a chance to talk about in the meeting. So we do about half hour, 45 minutes, where they give us additional input that they might not have wanted to share. Usually it's not a problem to share with the board members, but they get a lot more candid with us, honestly. And then after that, we do a survey, like old school paper survey, just real quick. What went well? What would you like to see different? What do you want to talk about next time? What was your favorite session? Why? Those kinds of questions. And then at the end, we say, okay, what else would you be willing to do with this company? And we give them a lot of choices. These are just some of the examples. Co-author a white paper, provide testimonials, sit on a panel at an industry event with this company, talk to prospects on our behalf, and put your CAB position on your LinkedIn profile. It's amazing to see how many board members have that in their title, that they are a board member for XYZ company. And so then that's additional visibility and credibility and prestige to have that on there. So when you think about that natural desire to reciprocate that value, that automatically leads to advocacy. And I could tell you story after story of where that's ultimately led to a new client, or to press, media that's covered an industry event. So many ways this advocacy thing can work. And because they, again, are invested in your success, they want to do these things. So then you take that on paper database to your marketing department and say, here you go. They've already said yes, they're willing to do these things. And it's remarkable, like almost always, 100% of them will do at least 2 more things. Some of them sign up for everything. They're just so excited. But at least 2 things, 100% of the board members will do in addition. So that's just gold for the marketing department.
Yeah, a ton of very important points in there, Betsy. I think one of the highlights is certainly the concept around the peer-to-peer engagement that customers can have with each other on an advisory board, and the role that like your team, the equivalent of your team, provides in terms of really being a somewhat agnostic presence in the board setting to help broker those relationships, obviously drive the recruitment initially, but then broker those relationships and enable each peer to kind of get value from each other, and almost create a safe space for them to start doing the retention work for the software companies that everyone works for on this webinar. In that, if we can have the key stakeholder or key sponsor inside one account advocating for the software vendor to another key stakeholder from another account, I mean, that's the most powerful form of customer success going, and blows any kind of case studies and references out of the water. So again, using, I think, a CAB to drive that advocacy within that initial stakeholder, then having them spread that across the rest of the board, I think is very, very powerful. And I think there is some scale here as well. I think, Betsy, I'll be curious as to your perception around looking at sort of big enterprise software companies, which is certainly a key specialty for you. The number of advisory boards. So yes, we want to keep them intimate and have an exclusive feel to them, 9-10 people, but am I correct in thinking that you don't just have to have one advisory board in your entire company? You could have advisory boards that span different parts of your technology stack, or different geographies, or different customer segments. So you've got sort of 9 or 10 per board, but maybe spread across some of those dimensions, so you get some scale from the advisory board motion that way.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. I worked with a client several years ago. They had 3 distinct verticals that they worked in. They worked with corporate librarians. This was a publishing technology company. They worked with corporate librarians, government librarians, and university librarians. So they had those 3 tracks. But then they had boards in EMEA, they had boards in Latin America, they had boards in the US and Asia Pac. So they sliced and diced their boards depending on the vertical and the region. And then we consolidated all of that information and looked for the commonalities as well as the gaps. And that was very telling, because, you know, business models don't always work in one place or in one vertical the way they do in another place or another vertical. So yeah, lots of ways to do that. And then if you think about the scale of that, then instead of retaining 9 or 10 people, you're retaining 40, 50, 60 people, customers. So that's a great way to scale and get that additional retention and insight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great point. So we come to our last element, which again is obviously as B2B technology solution providers, it's our products are the nucleus of all of these elements. I don't know if my science analogy works there in terms of elements and nucleus, but bear with me on that one. But certainly, yeah, these product capabilities and ultimately the feature functions. And Betsy, you mentioned it before, and it's interesting to me, and I'd love to get your perspective on what I think a lot of initial reactions are to the concept of a customer advisory board is that the conversations are going to be very strategic, very executive focused in terms of sentiment about macro trends and macro goals, et cetera, and well, yeah, I'm not going to get this board and this collection of very strategic personas in my accounts to get down to talking about future functions and what's working, and what's not working, and what do they want to see in the future at that level. But I'm thinking actually your experience and what you've enabled in your organizations that you've worked with is very different. And so we can get some very, very key insight that can feed the product roadmap to keep our products on that cutting edge, which then obviously helps us drive the outcomes, which then obviously helps us drive customer retention. But would appreciate your insight on that.
Yeah, there are a couple of sessions that we almost always do within the first 2 or 3 board meetings. And one is validating the product roadmap. And so a lot of times what we do is we get them up and moving around, and we have a 4x4, and we have this whole list of feature functions or high level topics. And we ask them, okay, how does this rate in terms of your thinking? And we give them red, yellow, and green sticky dots. And we say, okay, tell us if it's on your radar for this year or next year. So then they place these dots in a way where we can very quickly and graphically see, okay, this matters to a lot of people. This doesn't matter until next year, or it doesn't matter at all. And so it's a really great way at a high level to see what they're thinking in terms of product roadmap. It also is an opportunity to co-innovate. And so it's so fun to see, we do this session where we have these high-level executives with poster board and twine and sparkles and all these crafty type things. And we did one session one time, it was so much fun, where they innovated a new product, and then we had the other members vote with fake dollars how much they would pay for that product. And then we just said, you know, just blow it out. Whatever you can think of, throw it in there. Just really be creative. And that's fun, first of all. And it's energizing for the board members to do that. And they're working together and they're, you know, being silly, and it's a really fun thing to do. But they also get to something that could be very valuable for the host company moving forward. And then you get the validation from the other people in the boardroom because they're voting with their dollars. And I've actually seen one product that started off in an innovation session with the client that I just mentioned, that had the multiple boards, that actually made it to market. And it started because they co-innovated. So if you think about that, the customers are an extension of your R&D team then. And of course they're going to purchase it because they're already bought in by virtue of being part of the development of it. So then adoption is a slam dunk at that point because they've already bought in. So again, that mitigates the risk of throwing things out there with no customer input and, you know, spending tons and tons of money in development, hoping that it's going to work or be adopted. And this is a way to mitigate that risk. And then of course, when they adopt it and it works well, then they're going to stay because they like what's been built. And so again, all roads lead back to retention.
Yep. No, that makes total sense. I'm keen to get to everyone's questions, so we'll quickly wrap up here and move into the Q&A. So I think what Betsy and I have really been seeking to hammer home here is that across these value drivers and these metrics that you can measure the impact of your customer success strategy through a customer advisory board. And I will emphasize, I think, a professionally managed customer advisory board, which I think is a key distinction, especially in the kind of broader landscape of customer advisory boards. If you can have one of those set up and running, then all of these value drivers or metrics are going to see a positive impact. And really, we think retention especially is where it comes home to roost. And it's these 5 elements which, as you've probably gauged as we've talked through them, these are not standalone. These are very much interconnected, and we want product capabilities to be at the cutting edge to then help us drive the key outcomes that we want to be prescribing to our customer base. And that we need granular, almost scientific processes and playbooks designed to achieve those outcomes. And through the design of those processes, that gives birth to the ability to create these leading churn risk indicators that are actually accurate, and so on. And a customer advisory board just spans all of these elements and provides input that is, I say, very hard to replicate as a type of insight, a type of input through other other voice of the customer type of mechanisms, which remain important and you should certainly have as well, but they don't do what a customer advisory board does. Your per customer EBRs and QBRs that you're running do not achieve what a customer advisory board does. And so having a CAB and having one that's really certainly adopting the types of principles that Betsy and team deliver is I'd say a key addition to your customer success strategy. So just quickly, for Betsy, to conclude this piece, what do you recommend to the audience that they could maybe just leave this webinar and do next to start to move towards having a CAB that's going to deliver some of these results?
Yeah, I'd really just encourage everybody to think through everything that we talked about today and think, okay, how does this apply to my business? And what would be the business case for us to do a CAB? And what would those outcomes look like specific to our company? And As always, I can talk about this stuff all day long. So I would be delighted if anybody wants to continue the conversation beyond this webinar, beyond the Q&A. If you don't get all your questions answered, or if you just want to hash some things out about your current cab or the cab you're thinking about building, happy to have those conversations. My contact information is there on the screen. Anytime, just pick up the phone and give me a call or shoot me an email, and we can schedule a time to continue the conversation.
Perfect. So let's get into some questions. I think there's been some coming through. Let me pull up my my little screen here with the questions. So yeah, a great starting question. How do you know, how do your clients know, how do you help your clients know who to invite to the cab? What customers should be on the cab? What role within each customer should be invited?
Yeah, I'm really glad that question came up, because it's really important when you build out your cab. You don't want all raving fans, because then that's just going to be everybody holding hands and singing Kumbaya, and nobody's going to learn anything from that. But you don't want it to turn into a big gripe session either. So you don't want a bunch of people that are super angry with you. So there's definitely a balance. We have 26 different criteria that we look at when we're recruiting the board members. And that includes, of course, where they are on the happiness scale. It includes how long they've been a client, how much their annual spend is, what part of the country they come from, what industry they have, what services they purchase, gender. We have all kinds of different metrics that we look at, and we want to make sure that we get that balanced board. We also do rolling terms. So we ask them when they join the board, do you want to serve for 12, 18, or 24 months? We usually give them 2 or 3 meetings to kind of get the feel and figure out what they signed up for before they commit, before we ask them to commit. So then you're constantly rolling people off and bringing new people on. So you have the continuity, but you're also bringing in fresh ideas. The other thing is you can roll off one company, and if their competitor is a customer, then you can finally bring that guy on, because you don't want all of these people, you don't want competitors in the room. So there's definitely a science to the recruiting.
Okay, yeah, that's very interesting. And I guess once you've got that recruitment set up, and those that initial first board or revamp board set up, what do you think of in terms of cadence of meetings? How often you have a meeting? And then, if for argument's sake it's quarterly, what do you do to keep the board engaged and sort of, I guess, primed for the next board meeting 3 months later?
Yeah, that's such an important point. So we usually do anywhere from 2 to 4 meetings a year. Most people usually hit about 3. We'll do one early winter, late spring, and in the fall usually. And then over the holidays, it's not a great time to have meetings, and over the summer is not a great time to have meetings. So it's really important that within 2 weeks after the meeting, that we have a call and say, okay, here's what we heard, here's what the action items are, here are the things we're exploring, and then report back either at the next meeting, depending on the timing, or have another call and say, okay, here are the actions that we've been taking as a result of the feedback that you gave us, and here's where we are. And it's okay to say, we're not going to do anything with that, but at least you're communicating back to them. And or say, you know what, we're going to relook at that Q3 of next year. But as long as they know, okay, they heard us, they considered it, they have a plan, that's good. So anyway, it's really important to close that loop after each meeting, and then have these between meeting calls. We also will send out a monthly newsletter just to the CAB members saying, here's some updates, here's a great article that's relevant to something that we talked about. Here's somebody new to the executive team, whatever. So it's just a very specialized newsletter that goes out to the board. So lots of different ways to communicate, but it's key to the success of any CAB initiative.
Interesting. And I think another great question here, maybe we'll make this the last one. The owner on the software company side, your client side, the solution provider who's organizing and hosting the cabs, who typically owns that inside the software vendor, and is that something that they have a supporting team around? But who kind of ultimately is accountable for the success of a cab inside your clients?
Yeah, usually the CMO will own the actual initiative, with the CEO being heavily involved in validating the path of it and the agendas, just the cursory level sign off from the CEO. And then of course he's involved in the prep session that we do to make sure everybody's aligned before they go into the boardroom. And then we may have a junior level marketing person as the program manager, or a customer success manager as the program manager. It just kind of really depends how the organization's set up. But we have someone that we work with pretty much on a day-to-day basis, a weekly basis, for moving everything forward. And then when we start designing the sessions, we bring in the people that would be the subject matter experts for that particular session, and we build out the session with their input. And usually that's a member of the executive team. So it may be, if we're talking business models, we may bring in the CFO. Or if we're talking about the technology, we may bring in the CIO or CTO. So it kind of depends, but from a day-to-day basis, we usually work with a customer success manager or marketing manager.
Right. Okay, that's perfect. We've got time for one quick one, which I think is a great question, and it's important because it is relevant, and I think it's going to be relevant potentially for the long term, which is this the surge in our virtual relationships and how we virtually now are engaging, and obviously that being reactionary right now due to pandemics, but ultimately, hey, you know what, this might actually be the better path forward for the long term, pandemic or not. How do you see that evolving in the customer advisory board context, and how are you approaching, or how do you recommend companies kind of approach the cab concept, but considering this sort of virtual dynamic that we now have with each other?
Yeah, for right now with our clients, we're doing virtual meetings. Mm-hmm. There is nothing, in my opinion, there's nothing that can replace a face-to-face meeting. Mm-hmm. Just the activities and the networking and having wine together in the bar and all of those things that really go into the relationship building. So right now our clients are doing virtual. We actually have a meeting next month where we're bringing in a sommelier that's going to do a virtual wine tasting. So we're going to be sending the board members a cheese plate, or a cutting board, a cheese board with various cheeses and samples of wine, and sending those to them in advance, and then bringing in a sommelier to kind of do the wine tasting, just as a way to try to get some personal engagement. But moving forward, our goal for that particular client is to have our board meeting in October be face-to-face. It's just kind of a wait and see scenario. But I'm a big believer that because the world is so virtual, there's even more benefit to being in person. Mm-hmm,
mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And I need to find a way of getting myself on a board like that. If they're doing a wine tasting, sounds like my sort of jam. But Betsy, really appreciate all your time and your expertise. I think I've learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone who's attended has learned a lot. Thanks to everyone who has joined us today. We will certainly make this, we'll make this recording available. And as Betsy shared, please reach out if there's any other follow-up questions. For Betsy, same with myself, please do feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, Twitter, or via the ValueWise website, and we'll look forward to those conversations. But otherwise, stay safe and well, and we'll look forward to re-engaging soon. And stay tuned for the next ValueWise Retain and Expand Your Customers webinar in July.
Thanks for having me, Russ. Really appreciate it.